I never thought I would become the kind of person who looks in the mirror and sees a stranger. But here I am, 34 years old, sitting in my apartment at 2 in the morning, finally ready to admit what I have done, what I am still doing, what I cannot seem to stop. My name is Elena, and for the past 3 years, I have been cheating my boss. Not in some small, insignificant way that people might brush off as a minor workplace indiscretion. No, I have systematically deceived a man who gave me everything. A man who trusted me with his company, his vision, his reputation, and in many ways, his heart. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake night after night, is that he still trusts me. Even now, even after everything I have taken from him. He looks at me across the conference table with warmth in his eyes. He introduces me to clients as his right hand, his most valuable asset. He tells people that I am the reason his company survived the worst years of his career, and every single time he says those words, I feel something crack inside my chest. Because I know the truth. I know what I have been doing behind his back. I know the secrets I have kept, the lies I have told, and the damage I have caused. This is my confession. Not because I expect forgiveness, not because I am seeking absolution from strangers on the internet. I am telling this story because the weight of it has become unbearable, because silence has become a kind of torture, and because I need to understand, if only for myself, how I became this person. It started in January of 2021. I remember the exact date because it was the day after New Year's, and I was sitting in a coffee shop downtown, staring at my phone, wondering if I should answer the call that would change everything. At the time, I was working for a mid-sized marketing firm, the kind of place that looked impressive on paper but felt suffocating in reality. I had been there for 6 years, slowly climbing a ladder that seemed to have no top. Every year they promised me a promotion. Every year something got in the way: budget cuts, restructuring, a new director who wanted to bring in his own people. I was tired, burned out, starting to wonder if I had wasted my 20s chasing a career that would never love me back. Then the phone rang. It was a recruiter. She said she had an opportunity that might interest me. A privately owned consulting firm that specialized in helping small businesses grow. They were looking for someone with my exact skill set: financial analysis, strategic planning, client relations. The salary was nearly double what I was making. The title was Senior Vice President of Operations. And the owner, a man named Richard Callahan, had specifically requested to meet with me. I almost said no. I had been approached by recruiters before, and it usually led nowhere. But something about the way she described the company made me pause. She said Richard was different from other executives. He was hands-on, ethical, deeply invested in his employees. He had built the company from nothing after losing everything in the 2008 financial crisis. She said he believed in second chances. I needed a second chance, more than I wanted to admit. The interview was unlike anything I had experienced before. Richard did not ask me about my 5-year plan or my greatest weakness. He did not grill me on hypothetical scenarios or test my ability to recite industry jargon. Instead, he asked me about my life, where I grew up, what my parents did for a living, what I dreamed about when I was a child. He wanted to know who I was, not just what I could do. I told him things I had never told anyone in a professional setting. I told him about growing up in a small town in Ohio, watching my father work himself into an early grave at a factory that laid him off 2 weeks before his pension vested. I told him about my mother, who cleaned houses for wealthy families and came home every night with blistered hands and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I told him about the scholarship that got me to college, the student loans that still haunted me, and the chip on my shoulder that had driven me to succeed in a world that never felt like it wanted me. Richard listened to every word. He did not interrupt. He did not check his phone. He just listened, with this look in his eyes that made me feel seen in a way I had not felt in years. When I finished talking, he leaned back in his chair and said something I will never forget. He said, "Elena, I have interviewed a lot of people for this position. Some of them had better resumes than you. Some of them had more experience. But none of them had what you have. None of them had that fire, that hunger. I can teach skills. I cannot teach heart. And I think you have more heart than anyone I have met in a long time. He offered me the job on the spot. I accepted before I could talk myself out of it. For the first year, everything was exactly what Richard had promised. The company, Callahan Consulting, was a tight-knit team of about 30 people. Everyone knew everyone. There were no politics, no backstabbing, no corporate games. Richard ran the place like a family. He remembered birthdays. He showed up at hospitals when employees had surgeries. He gave bonuses when clients paid early and never mentioned it again. I thrived in that environment. I had spent so many years fighting for recognition, clawing my way through bureaucracy, trying to prove myself to people who did not care. At Callahan Consulting, I did not have to fight. I just had to work. And the work was good, meaningful. We helped small business owners save their companies. We helped families keep their livelihoods. Every success felt personal. Richard and I grew close, not romantically. He was happily married to a woman named Susan, and he adored her in a way that was almost old-fashioned. But professionally, we became partners. He trusted me with more and more responsibility. He asked for my input on major decisions. He started introducing me to his most important clients, letting me sit in on meetings that had previously been reserved for him alone. By the end of my first year, I had become his confidant, his advisor, his right hand. I was happy, genuinely happy. For the first time in my adult life, I did not feel like I was running on a treadmill that led nowhere. I felt like I was building something, like I was part of something that mattered. And then I discovered the truth about Callahan Consulting. It happened by accident. I was working late one night, preparing a financial report for a quarterly review. Richard had asked me to compile data from the last 3 years, and I needed access to some older files that were stored on a shared drive. As I was digging through folders, looking for the right documents, I stumbled onto something I was not supposed to see. It was a folder labeled Legacy Accounts. I assumed it was just archival material, old clients who were no longer active, but when I opened it, I found something very different. There were records of payments, thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands, being transferred from client accounts into a separate entity called LC Holdings. The transfers were small enough to avoid scrutiny, spread out over months and years, disguised as consulting fees and administrative costs. But when I added them up, the total was staggering. Over the past decade, nearly $3 million had been siphoned from client accounts into this mysterious company. I felt sick, physically sick. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the files, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This could not be right. This could not be the company I had come to love. This could not be Richard. But the more I dug, the clearer the picture became. LC Holdings was a shell company. The initials stood for Laura Callahan, Richard's younger sister. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my apartment, staring at the wall, trying to figure out what to do. Every instinct told me to report it, to go to the authorities, to the clients, to someone who could hold Richard accountable. He was stealing from the very people who trusted him, the small business owners who came to him desperate and vulnerable, the families who put their futures in his hands. But another part of me hesitated, a darker part, a part that saw an opportunity. I am not proud of what I am about to tell you. I have spent 3 years trying to justify it, trying to convince myself that I had no choice, that Richard deserved what was coming to him, that I was somehow the victim in all of this. But the truth is simpler and uglier than any story I could tell myself. The truth is that I saw a way to get rich, and I took it. It did not happen all at once. It started small, the way these things always do. A few weeks after my discovery, I approached Richard with a proposal. I told him I wanted to take on more responsibility with the financial side of the business. I said I had noticed some inefficiencies in our accounting systems and thought I could streamline things. He was thrilled. He said it was exactly the kind of initiative he had hoped I would show. He gave me access to everything: bank accounts, investment portfolios, client ledgers, the keys to his kingdom. At first, I just watched. I learned how the money flowed, where the vulnerabilities were, how Richard had been hiding his embezzlement for so long. He was clever, I will give him that. He had created a system of misdirection that would have fooled most auditors. But once you knew what to look for, the patterns were obvious. I spent months studying those patterns, memorizing them, and then slowly, I started to insert myself into them. The first time I took money, it was $5,000. I justified it by telling myself it was a test. I wanted to see if the system worked, if Richard's methods were as foolproof as they seemed. I transferred the money into a personal account I had opened under a fake business name. Nothing happened. No alarms, no questions. Richard never noticed. The second time, I took 10,000, then 20, then 50. Each time, I told myself it would be the last. Each time, I found a new reason to take more. I deserved it, I said. I was working harder than anyone else. Richard was a thief anyway, so what did it matter if I skimmed from his skimming? I was not hurting anyone. The clients did not know. Richard did not know. The money was just sitting there, invisible, waiting to be taken. Within a year, I had stolen over $300,000. I know how that sounds. I know you are probably sitting there, reading this, wondering how I could live with myself, how I could look Richard in the eye every day, accept his praise, listen to him talk about integrity and trust while I was robbing him blind. The honest answer is that I became very good at lying. To Richard, to my colleagues, to myself. I developed a kind of split personality. There was Elena at work, the loyal, hardworking vice president who stayed late and solved problems and made Richard's life easier. And there was Elena in the shadows, the one who transferred money in the middle of the night, who checked offshore account balances on her phone during meetings, who felt a sick thrill every time she got away with it. For a while, the thrill was enough to drown out the guilt. I bought things: a new apartment in a nicer part of town, expensive clothes, a car I had always dreamed of owning. I told people I had made some good investments. I told myself I was finally getting what I deserved. But guilt has a way of finding you, no matter how deep you try to bury it. It started as sleeplessness. I would lie awake for hours, my mind racing through every possible scenario of exposure. What if someone found the accounts? What if Richard hired an outside auditor? What if one of the clients noticed a discrepancy in their statements? I became paranoid, obsessive, constantly checking and rechecking my tracks. Then the nightmares came. Dreams where Richard confronted me, where he asked me why, where I watched his face crumble from confusion to disbelief to devastation. Dreams where I was in prison, orange jumpsuit, gray walls, my mother crying on the other side of a glass partition. Dreams where everyone I had ever known looked at me with disgust, where I tried to speak but no words came out, where I was trapped in a silence of my own making. I started drinking. Not a lot at first. Just a glass of wine to take the edge off. Then two. Then a bottle. I would sit alone in my expensive apartment, surrounded by things I had bought with stolen money, and drink until the thoughts stopped. But they never really stopped. They just went quiet for a while. The second year was when things started to get complicated. Richard's wife, Susan, was diagnosed with cancer. Breast cancer, stage 3. Richard was devastated. He took a leave of absence to be with her, leaving me in charge of the day-to-day operations. He trusted me completely. He said I was the only person he could count on to keep things running while he focused on his family. I should have stopped then. I should have taken that moment of clarity, that reminder of what really mattered in life, and used it to change course. But I did not. Instead, I saw an opportunity. With Richard distracted, I had more freedom than ever. I increased the transfers. I expanded my network of shell companies. I became bolder, more confident, more reckless. By the end of the second year, I had taken over $700,000. And then something happened that I did not expect. I started to care about Susan. She was fighting for her life, going through chemotherapy, losing her hair, losing weight, struggling to get out of bed most days. And Richard, for all his flaws, loved her with everything he had. He was at the hospital every day. He held her hand during treatments. He read to her when she was too weak to hold a book. He became a shadow of himself, exhausted and frightened and utterly devoted. I visited them a few times. Richard had asked me to bring some documents, and while I was there, I sat with Susan. She was kind to me, genuinely kind. She asked about my life, my family, whether I was taking care of myself. She told me that Richard talked about me all the time, that he considered me a blessing, that he said I was the daughter he never had. Those words hit me harder than I expected. Daughter he never had. I spent the drive home crying, ugly, gasping sobs that made my chest ache. I pulled over on the side of the highway and sat there for 20 minutes, hands shaking, trying to breathe. For the first time, I saw myself clearly, not as the scrappy underdog who had outsmarted a corrupt system, not as the clever woman who had taken what she deserved. I saw myself as what I was, a thief, a liar, a fraud. I almost confessed that night. I sat in my car outside Richard's office, draft email open on my phone, ready to tell him everything. But I could not do it. I could not destroy him while his wife was dying. I could not add that burden to everything he was already carrying. So I made myself a promise. I would stop. No more transfers, no more stealing. I would let things settle, and when Susan recovered, I would find a way to make things right. Susan died 4 months later. I stood at her funeral, watching Richard hold their children, watching him try to be strong for everyone else while he was falling apart inside. And I felt something I had never felt before. Shame so deep and so complete that it seemed to hollow me out from the inside. I had stolen from this man. I had betrayed him. And now I was standing at his wife's grave, accepting his gratitude for keeping the business running, listening to him thank me for being his rock during the hardest year of his life. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the ground to open up and swallow me. I wanted to be anyone other than who I was, but I did not confess. Even then, even with Susan's casket being lowered into the earth, even with Richard's tears staining my shoulder, I said nothing. I told myself it was the wrong time. I told myself he could not handle another loss. I told myself I would tell him later, when he was stronger, when the grief had loosened its grip. But the truth is, I was a coward. I was afraid of losing everything I had built, the job, the reputation, the life I had constructed on a foundation of lies. I was afraid of what would happen to me if the truth came out. So I buried my secret the same way we buried Susan. And I kept going. The third year was the worst. Richard came back to work a changed man. The spark that had drawn me to him in that first interview was gone. He moved through the office like a ghost, present, but not really there. He delegated more and more to me, trusting me with decisions he would have once made himself. He told me he could not do it without me. He told me I was the only thing holding the company together. And I was. In a twisted way, I was. The company was thriving. Revenue was up. Clients were happy. We had expanded into new markets, hired new staff, built a reputation as one of the best boutique consulting firms in the region. All of it built on theft. I had stopped taking money after Susan's diagnosis. I kept my promise about that, at least. But the money I had already taken was still out there. Over $700,000 scattered across offshore accounts and shell companies, waiting for me. I could not bring myself to touch it. Every time I thought about it, I felt sick. It was blood money, ghost money. It was the price of Richard's trust, and I could not spend a single dollar without feeling like I was betraying him all over again. So it just sat there, growing quietly through interest and investments. A fortune I could not touch. A secret I could not tell. Meanwhile, I watched Richard try to rebuild his life. He threw himself into work with a desperation that worried me. He was in the office by 6 every morning and rarely left before 10 at night. He said working was the only thing that helped him forget. He said the silence at home was unbearable. I understood that. I understood what it meant to use work as an escape from the thoughts that haunted you. But I also saw what it was doing to him. He was burning out. His health was declining. His relationship with his children was strained. He was giving everything to a company that I had been secretly bleeding dry for years. The guilt became a physical presence. It lived in my chest like a weight, pressing down on my lungs, making it hard to breathe. I stopped sleeping almost entirely. I would lie awake until 4 or 5 in the morning, then drag myself to work and pretend everything was fine. I started therapy. I could not tell my therapist the truth, of course, but I told her I was struggling with guilt about something from my past, something I could not undo. She asked me if I had considered making amends. I told her I did not know how. She said sometimes amends were not about fixing what was broken. Sometimes they were about accepting that some things could not be fixed. Sometimes they were about living differently from now on, being the person you wished you had been. I thought about that a lot, being the person I wished I had been. At work, I started making changes. Small things at first. I made sure our billing practices were completely transparent. I implemented new oversight systems that would make embezzlement nearly impossible. I personally reviewed every financial report, looking for discrepancies, making sure no one else could do what Richard and I had done. Richard noticed the improvements. He praised my dedication. He said he was lucky to have someone so ethical, so thorough, so committed to doing things the right way. The irony nearly broke me. I also started mentoring younger employees. There was a woman named Jessica, fresh out of business school, hungry and ambitious in a way that reminded me of myself 10 years ago. I took her under my wing. I taught her everything I knew about the industry, and I tried, in subtle ways, to teach her the things I wished someone had taught me. I told her that success meant nothing if you could not sleep at night. I told her that reputation was the only thing that really mattered in the long run. I told her that there would be moments when the wrong choice seemed like the easy choice, and that those were the moments that defined who you really were. She listened. She nodded. She probably thought I was just being philosophical. She had no idea I was really talking about myself. As the months passed, I found myself becoming two people again. But this time, it was different. The person I showed the world was still a lie, still built on a secret I could not tell. But the person I was becoming, the one who mentored Jessica and improved systems and tried to be better, that person felt more real than the thief I had been. I started to wonder if redemption was possible. Not forgiveness, not from Richard, not from anyone, but something smaller, something more personal, a way of living that might, over time, outweigh the harm I had caused. I did not have an answer. I still do not. But I kept trying. About 6 months ago, something happened that changed everything. Richard asked me to dinner, just the two of us, at a quiet restaurant outside of town. He said he had something important to discuss. I spent the entire day convinced that he knew, that somehow, after all these years, he had discovered what I had done. I practiced my confession in the mirror. I prepared myself for the confrontation. I even considered running, just disappearing, starting over somewhere no one knew my name. But when we sat down, Richard did not accuse me of anything. Instead, he thanked me. He said that the last 3 years had been the hardest of his life. Losing Susan, trying to be a father to grieving children, trying to keep a company running when he barely had the energy to get out of bed. He said he would not have survived without me. He said I was the most loyal, trustworthy person he had ever known. Then he told me he was retiring. He was stepping back from the company, spending more time with his kids, maybe traveling. He said Susan had always wanted to see the world, and he wanted to do it for her, and he wanted me to take over, not just as an employee, as the owner. He wanted to sell me the company at a fraction of its value. He wanted to hand me everything he had built. I sat there, listening to him lay out the details, and I felt something break inside me. Not guilt this time. Something deeper. Something that felt like my soul cracking open. This man was offering me his life's work, the thing he had built from nothing after losing everything, the legacy he had hoped to leave behind. And he was offering it to me because he trusted me. He still trusted me. After everything I had done, after 3 years of lies and theft and betrayal, he looked at me and saw someone worthy of his trust. I excused myself to the bathroom. I locked the door and sat on the floor and cried until I could not breathe. I cried for Susan, for Richard, for the person I could have been if I had made different choices, for all the years I had wasted building a life on a foundation of sand. When I came back to the table, my eyes were red and my hands were shaking. Richard asked if I was okay. I told him I was just overwhelmed, just grateful, just emotional about the opportunity. He smiled and said he understood. He had no idea what he was really seeing. I went home that night and made a decision. I could not take Richard's company. I could not accept his generosity while carrying this secret. I could not build a future on top of a lie. I was going to confess. But first, I needed to understand something. I needed to understand how Richard had justified his own crimes. Because in all my digging, all my discovery of what he had done, I had never actually confronted him about it. I had assumed he was simply a hypocrite, preaching integrity while stealing from clients. But I realized I had never given him a chance to explain. I started looking into the legacy accounts again, the transfers to LC Holdings, Richard's sister Laura. What I found surprised me. Laura Callahan had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease 12 years ago. She had no children, no spouse, no savings. Richard had been supporting her care out of his own pocket for years, but after the 2008 crash wiped out his investments, he could no longer afford the facility she needed. The money he had siphoned from client accounts, all $3 million, had gone directly to Laura's care. Every penny. There was no yacht, no vacation home, no secret offshore fortune. Just a man trying to keep his sister alive while the system failed her. I am not saying what he did was right. Stealing is stealing. Fraud is fraud. He betrayed the trust of people who depended on him, regardless of his reasons. But I understood it, in a way that made my own crimes seem even more hollow. Richard had stolen for love, for family, for someone who had no one else. I had stolen for greed, for ego, for things I did not need and could not enjoy. The comparison was devastating. I spent weeks after that discovery in a kind of fog. I went to work. I did my job. I smiled and nodded and said all the right things. But inside, I was unraveling. Everything I had told myself about Richard, about justice, about my right to take what I wanted, collapsed under the weight of the truth. I was not Robin Hood. I was not a victim fighting back against a corrupt system. I was just a thief who had told herself a pretty story. The realization did not set me free. It buried me deeper. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I stopped caring about the things that had once mattered to me. The expensive apartment felt like a prison. The nice car felt like a coffin. Everything I owned reminded me of who I really was. My therapist noticed the change. She asked if something had happened. I told her I had learned something about myself that I did not know how to live with. She asked if I wanted to talk about it. I almost told her everything. The words were right there, on the tip of my tongue. But I could not do it. Confessing to a stranger, even a therapist, felt like cheating, like taking the easy way out. If I was going to confess, it needed to be to Richard, to the person I had actually wronged. But every time I imagined that conversation, every time I pictured the look on his face when he realized what I had done, I froze. I could not do it. I was still too much of a coward. So I kept living in limbo, going through the motions, waiting for something to change. 3 weeks ago, something did. Richard called me into his office. He looked tired, older than his years, still carrying the weight of everything he had lost. But there was something else in his eyes, something I had not seen before. He closed the door and asked me to sit down. Then he told me he knew. He knew about the legacy accounts. He knew about the money he had taken. And he knew that I had discovered it years ago and never said a word. I felt the blood drain from my face. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Richard held up his hand. He was not finished. He said he had been waiting for me to confront him, to demand an explanation, to threaten exposure. But I never did. I just kept working, kept being loyal, kept helping him hold everything together. And he had spent 3 years trying to understand why. At first, he thought I was biding my time, gathering evidence, preparing to destroy him when it would hurt the most. But as the months passed, as I stayed by his side through Susan's illness and death, as I improved systems and mentored staff and made the company better, he started to wonder if he had been wrong about me. He said he had watched me change. He had seen the guilt in my eyes, even when I tried to hide it. He had noticed the way I flinched when he praised my integrity, the way I avoided talking about the past, the way I carried myself like someone with a weight on her shoulders. He said he finally understood what had happened. I had discovered his secret, and instead of using it against him, I had used it as permission. Permission to do the same thing. Permission to take what I wanted, justifying it by pointing to what he had done. He knew I had been stealing from him. He had known for over a year. I sat there, frozen, unable to speak, unable to move, while Richard laid out everything: the shell companies I had created, the transfers I had made, the exact amounts, the exact dates, the entire web of deception I had thought was invisible. He knew all of it. I waited for the anger, the rage, the threats of prosecution, but they never came. Instead, Richard asked me a question. He asked me if I was sorry. I do not know how long I sat there before I could answer. It felt like hours, years, a lifetime of silence compressed into a single moment. Then I told him the truth. I told him I was sorry. Not because I had been caught, not because I was afraid of the consequences, but because I had betrayed someone who had treated me with kindness, someone who had given me a chance when no one else would, someone who had seen something in me that I had not seen in myself. I told him about the guilt, the sleepless nights, the nightmares, the drinking, the therapy. I told him about watching Susan fight for her life and wanting to confess, wanting to be better, wanting to be the person he thought I was. I told him about discovering the truth about Laura, about understanding, finally, why he had done what he had done, about realizing that my own crimes had no such justification. I told him I did not expect forgiveness. I did not deserve it. I just wanted him to know that I understood what I had done and that I would spend the rest of my life trying to be different. Richard listened to everything without interruption. When I finished, the room was silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and uneven, echoing in my ears. Then Richard said something that I will remember until the day I die. He said, "I knew you had it in you, the capacity for this. I saw it in your eyes the first day we met. That hunger, that chip on your shoulder. I recognized it because I have it too. We are the same, Elena. Both of us broken. Both of us willing to do things we should not do to survive." He paused, took a breath. "But I also saw something else in you, something that I had lost in myself. A conscience that would not stay quiet. A heart that kept fighting even when you tried to silence it. I watched you change over these 3 years. I watched you become someone better. And I realized that if I exposed you, if I brought you down, I would be destroying the best version of yourself, the version that was trying so hard to emerge." I did not understand what he was saying. I asked him what he meant. He said he had made a decision. He was not going to report me. He was not going to pursue prosecution. He was not going to tell anyone what I had done, but there were conditions. First, the money. All of it. Every dollar I had taken would need to be returned. He did not care how long it took. He did not care if I had to sell everything I owned. The debt would be paid, one way or another. Second, the legacy accounts, his own crimes. He wanted me to help him unwind them, to find a way to make restitution to the clients he had wronged without destroying the company or exposing either of us to prosecution. It would take years. It would be complicated, but it needed to happen. Third, and this was the hardest part, he wanted me to stay. He wanted me to take over the company, just as he had planned, but not as a reward, as a responsibility. He wanted me to spend the rest of my career building something honest on top of the ruins we had created. He wanted me to be the person I was trying to become. I sat there, stunned, trying to process what I was hearing. He was not forgiving me. He was not letting me off the hook. He was giving me a chance to earn something I had not earned, a chance to become someone worthy of the trust he was still inexplicably offering. It was more terrifying than punishment. It was redemption with conditions, a lifelong debt that could never be fully repaid. I asked him why. Why give me this chance? Why not just turn me in and be done with it? Richard smiled. It was a sad smile, tired and worn, but real. He said, "Because I saw myself in you, and I wished, all those years ago, that someone had given me a chance to do things differently. I cannot change what I did. I cannot bring back the money I stole or the trust I betrayed, but I can give you what I never had, a chance to start over, to make it right, to be better than who you were." He stood up, walked to the door, put his hand on the handle. Then he looked back at me and said, "Do not waste it." He left, and I sat there, alone in his office, crying for the second time in as many weeks. That was 3 weeks ago. I have not wasted it. Not yet. I sold the apartment. I sold the car. I sold everything I bought with the money I stole. I have already returned over $400,000, and I am on track to repay the rest within 2 years. Richard and I have started working on the legacy accounts. It is slow, delicate work. We have to be careful not to trigger audits or raise suspicions, but we are making progress. Last week, we completed the first restitution payment. A small business owner in Ohio who had been overcharged for years without knowing it. We framed it as a billing error, a refund we had discovered during a routine review. He thanked us. He said it was refreshing to work with a company that valued honesty. I almost laughed, almost cried. I just nodded and said we tried our best. I am still at Callahan Consulting, still Richard's right hand, still the person everyone trusts. But something is different now. The weight is still there, the guilt, the knowledge of what I did. But it is not crushing me anymore. It is motivating me. Every day I wake up and try to be the person Richard believed I could become. Every day I fail in small ways, and every day I try again. I do not know if this is redemption. I do not know if what I am doing now can ever make up for what I did then. The philosophers and the theologians might say no. The damage is done. The trust is broken. The person I was cannot be erased by the person I am trying to be. But I am trying anyway. Because the alternative, the person I was 3 years ago, the one who saw an opportunity and took it without thinking about the cost, that person was not really living. She was just surviving, taking what she could, hoarding what she had, building a life that meant nothing because it was built on nothing. This is not a story with a happy ending. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Richard still looks at me sometimes with something that is not quite trust, not quite suspicion, but something in between. He is watching me, testing me, waiting to see if I will prove him right or prove him wrong. I understand that. I have earned that skepticism. But I am also earning, slowly, something else. Something I cannot quite name. A sense of purpose. A reason to get up in the morning. A belief, however fragile, that people can change. That I can change. That the worst things we do are not always the last things we do. I cheated my boss for 3 years. I lied to his face. I stole his money. I betrayed his trust in ways he is only beginning to understand. And he still gave me a chance. I do not know why. I do not know if I would have done the same in his position. I probably would not have. I would have wanted revenge, justice, someone to pay for what had been done to me. But Richard chose differently. He chose to see me not as I was, but as I could be. And in doing so, he gave me something more valuable than money or power or success. He gave me the possibility of becoming someone worth being. I am still working toward that. Every day, every hour, every choice I make is a chance to be better than the choice before. I do not know how this story ends. I do not know if I will succeed or fail, if Richard's faith in me will be justified or misplaced, if I will spend the rest of my life atoning for something that can never be fully atoned for. But I know this. I am no longer the person who cheated her boss for 3 years. I am the person who is trying, with everything she has, to become someone different. And maybe that is enough. Maybe becoming is the point. Maybe we are not defined by the worst things we have done, but by what we choose to do next. Maybe trust is not something that is given once and held forever. Maybe it is something that has to be earned, over and over again, through 10,000 small choices that add up to a lifetime. Richard still trusts me after everything, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure that trust is not misplaced. Not because I have to, not because I was caught, but because I finally understand what it means to be worthy of something. I understand what it costs, and I am willing to pay. This is my confession. Not the end of a story, but the beginning of a different one. A story I am still writing, one choice at a time. I do not know what comes next, but for the first time in 3 years, I am not afraid of it. I am ready.